Today on Wood.Work.LIFE, we're going to build a simple stacked parts organizer.
Don't sweat the technique.
This project starts with breaking down 3/4 of a sheet of 3/4 inch MDF. I use my track saw. You could easily do this with a circular saw and a straight edge. I do recommend, however, using a high tooth count blade so you get smooth paintable edges. I cut off the ends first to use for the tracks and top and bottom of the cabinet, and then cut out 2 long strips that would become the sides. It isn't critical these cuts are perfectly accurate, as it's good practice to clean these up at the table saw for accuracy. I left an extra 1/4 inch on all my measurements to be trimmed off the table saw later. At the table saw, I use a higher than necessary blade height and a high tooth count blade to get super smooth cuts in the MDF. This isn't the safest thing to do, but it's a good way to avoid tear out on sheet goods. If you're going to do this, at minimum use your blade guard and keep your hands well clear of the blade. After trimming the sides and top of the cabinet to their final width, I went about cutting out the runners, dividers for all the stack storage containers. I cut each divider at 1.5 inches to provide sufficient space for the 2 different size storage containers I was going to be using for this cabinet. Next, I used 2 different size spacers to lay out the dividers for my cabinet. One of the sets of dividers I was using was deep, and the Husky stacking storage containers I was using were shallower. I also wanted to leave a spot for my Husky Ratchet Set and Husky Tap and Die set, which were similar size and form factor to the organization bins. As I was installing some of the dividers, they split because I was, of course, driving brad nails into MDF, but this didn't bother me too much as the dividers were primarily held in place with glue. If you wanted this to be absolutely perfect with no splits, you could pre-drill and countersink these and attach them with screws instead. But that's up to you. I just wanted to install them quickly. With all of the dividers installed, I carefully sew the top, bottom, and middle dividers onto one side and stack the other side on top. This is a bit nerve-wracking, but it worked out just fine. The center divider is crucial to prevent the cabinet from racking after it's under load. I then pinned each side in with some brad nails and pre-drilled and countersunk for some MDF screws to permanently install the side panels. After installing one of the sides with screws, I flipped over the assembly and applied glue to the edge of the dividers. For the center divider, I used the same spacers I had used earlier to install the runners to evenly space the center divider on both sides before installing it with glue and screws. That's pretty much assembly done. If you wanted this cabinet to be extra rigid and not sway or rack at all, you could reinforce it with an 1/8 inch hardboard back panel. For me, I wanted it to be open so that I could blow out the dust as it built up on the organizers over time. At this point, it was just time for a test fit to make sure that my measurements all stacked up, which they did, and a nice coat of black paint to match the rest of my shop. This cabinet's going to be really helpful in keeping some of my frequently used items at arm's reach and clearly organized and labeled. I left a little room for expansion, but if I ever outgrow this one, I could easily build another one and stack them right next to each other. Screwing them together would actually make both of them more rigid. I didn't just use these Husky organizers for small parts organizations though. I also used some of them with Kaizen foam to shadow some of my tools that had accessories that went with them, like my upholstery stapler and staples. Storing these less frequently used tools with their consumables and accessories will make them a lot more useful when I need them. I also went full dad mode and dedicated a spot for this 125 feet Husky Ratchet Set. I don't often use ratchets in woodworking, but when I do, I'm always missing the one I need. So it'll be nice having these at arm's reach when I need them. Of course, I'm sure that won't be the case for long as my girls start building stuff and getting into my tools. I also left a space for another new addition to my shop, this Tap and Die set from Husky. I found these work just as well on setting threads in wood as they do for setting threads in metal, and they're really nice to have around for working with both. I hope you enjoyed this build. This is just a really quick one to get my shop a little organized. I'm going to be doing a few more of these coming up. So check those out and get subscribed if you aren't already. And remember to keep your tools sharp and your mind sharper.